Hey, this is Toto Bravo, and we're going to continue on with the surplus rifle theme that we've been doing. Today on the table we have a British Enfield number 4 Mark II, chambered in 303 British. So let's talk about it. The number 4 Mark II Enfield, last of a breed. There's an old joke that states, if you spot troops but you cannot identify them, fire around in their general direction. If you receive massive volumes of machine gun fire in return, they're German. If there's a pause for a few minutes and you're pummeled into the next world with artillery and air support, they're American. If you receive high volumes of incredibly accurate rifle fire in return, they're British. That high volume of incredibly accurate British rifle fire originally came from the Enfield. Thought I'd share that. I thought that was kind of interesting. The first bolt-action Enfields came into service in the 1800s and saw their first action in the British colonial wars. The last batch of British-made Enfields intended for general issue began production in the late 1940s and lasted until the 1950s. By 1955, the FN FAL, in its many guises, was coming into service throughout the West. The last of the breed, the number 4 Mark II, evolved from the number 1 Mark III, SMLE, often lovingly referred to as the Smelly of World War I fame. These rifles were often referred to as Irish contact rifles, but in reality they were made for a number of end users, not just Ireland. Most of these entered the U.S. in the 1990s. That's about the time I got this, late 90s. The Mark II was a refinement of wartime number 4. Instead of an L-type flip sight, with which most number 4s were equipped during the war, the number 2 had a much more precise micrometer installed. The large diameter battle sight was, however, retained and used for most practical purposes. So this is the micrometer sight here. If you can see that, we'll take some pictures of it. The bolt mechanism remained the same and basically unchanged from the wartime rifles. The trigger was slightly repositioned, and in many people's opinion, the Mark II trigger represents a noticeable improvement. I really enjoy the trigger and the bolt on this rifle here. The stripper clip guide, right here, left side safety and firing pin tail. Rear sight is folded to its battle sight position, providing a large aperture for rapid engagement. We'll get a picture of that. There's the battle sights there, micrometer sights there. Cosmetically, the exterior of the Mark II is a little less pleasing to the eye for most people, as birch was a predominant wood used on the Mark II, compared to some of the exceptionally handsome long branch number 4s produced in Canada during World War II with beautiful walnut stocks. The Mark II can appear a little industrial in comparison. The lovingly painted over finish was retained from many of the wartime guns, and indeed the practice continued with many British small arms. So that's why you've got this funky kind of a black finish on the rifle. It doesn't look blued. Essentially, the differences between the number 4 and the very first number 1s used in Africa against the hostile tribes and the Boers were actually quite small. The core of the rifle, as far as design goes, changed fundamentally very little. The heart of the cock and closing bolt, you get that resistance, and there you go. So now we're cocked on closing. If you couldn't see that, I'm sorry. If you've ever fired an Enfield, you'll be in for a bit of a surprise the first time you do. The first thing that you'll likely notice is the speed of the bolt. It's noticeably faster for people to operate than the Mauser action, which cocks on opening. This rather unique arrangement is what made the Enfield such a potentially rapid firing rifle in the right hands. The origin of the Mad Minute begins with the Enfield. Well-trained British soldiers were paid bonuses based upon their musketry skills, and scores were provided, and with practice ammunition almost at will before World War I. Volunteer soldiers, being the competitive type A personalities they normally are, this led to competitions for speed and accuracy. This is where the Enfield excels. It wasn't unusual for a well-practiced soldier, especially among the old contemptibles, to be able to load and fire 30 rounds per minute. The record approached 60 rounds per minute. That's pretty impressive. Keep in mind, this wasn't a 5-round magazine. The Enfield had the 10-round magazine. It wasn't intended to be a detachable reloading. Rather, a 5-round stripper clips were employed to rapidly top it off. But you could drop the magazine and carry more than one, I guess, if you chose to. But that wasn't the intended purpose. The intended purpose was the stripper clips. Additionally, the 303 was accurate and powerful, although it began life as a black powder cartridge. By the 20th century, cordite loads, Angry Spaghetti, were used and maintained throughout World War II. The 303 loaded a 174 grain bullet as standard ball that maintained considerable accuracy and lethality out to 600 to 700 yard mark from the number 4. Although the 303 fades a bit after that point, especially in comparison to the 7.92 x 5.7 Mauser, the speed of the Enfield action, its ease of reloading, higher magazine capacity, better battle sights make it a better battle weapon than the K98. I particularly prefer the K98, but I do enjoy the British 303 too. So that was just a little bit of a background, a little bit of information like I like to give when I'm talking about these surplus rifles. I want to go through and check out some of the markings on here. This, unlike some of the Mausers I've shared, isn't that marked up. Doesn't have that many markings, but the ones that are on here I will supply in photos here. Beautiful rifle. We will get out to the range and shoot this. We'll do it at 50 and 100 yards. I got some stripper clips here. But yeah, this is a beautiful rifle. It handles well. It's beautiful wood. The only thing that kind of detracts from the paint that came on the rifle, it's not the prettiest paint job. And this one does in fact have the brass rear butt plate. So very interesting, very nice. So our next step will be to get this out to the range. We'll shoot it, and I think ultimately what we'll do is we'll take all these surplus rifles out, maybe to the 50-yard range, and see, just shoot them and see how they group compared to one another. Kind of a pointless video, but we'll check it out. On the table today we have an M901 ITV, or improved tow vehicle, with the dual launcher for the tow missiles. Pretty cool vehicle. Spent a lot of time on those, if anybody gives a shit. But they have their place. They're out of date now, but at the time, if they were used correctly, at standoff, haul down, about 3,750 meters off from the target, they were pretty effective. But that's not what this video is about. So this is Tow 2 Bravo. Until I see you at the range again, I appreciate you watching, and we'll get another surplus rifle on the table.